Hello, this is the Love of Wisdom podcast, and I'm your host, Anthony Pensa. Here at this podcast, we cover information on philosophy and the importance of philosophy in our daily lives. And this podcast is used to instruct and apply practical wisdom from philosophy to students, intellectuals, professors, institutions, and the average worker or average man. You can find me on Instagram at the Love of Wisdom 424, Facebook at the Love of Wisdom, and you can subscribe down here below to my YouTube channel at the Love of Wisdom. And you can also follow me. I have a Patreon account that I'm making, but also Twitter at the Love of Wisdom. My Patreon is also the Love of Wisdom as well. Today's podcast will focus on the philosophy of science and its relevance in the modern world. Why do we need science, and what makes science valid? What is science, and how is it used in the modern world? How do we perceive science, and how do we view science and use that as a means of understanding the world around us? And how do we really see the wisdom of science? So we start to question, right? We use questions in mind. Particularly, I'll be addressing some of these questions. There's a whole plethora of them, but I'll be discussing these questions and many others to get at the root of the philosophy of science. I'll be discussing one particular famous philosopher, Thomas Nagel, and his book, Mind and the Cosmos, and discuss its importance in the world and how you can use it in your daily life. Thomas Nagel, as many people may or may not know, is an American philosopher. He came from the university. He got his PhD. He's a professor, or was a professor at the University of Philosophy, university professor, at New York University, and he taught from 1980 to 2016 in his retirement. He focused on the philosophy of mind, political philosophy, philosophy of science, and ethics, and he wrote many books, several books. He was born July 4th, 1937, and he has also influenced many famous philosophers. His book, Mind and Cosmos, covers his philosophy by arguing that some phenomena are not best described from a more objective perspective. He talks about thinker's standpoint and talks about presenting to him what is rather him. The thinker's standpoint doesn't necessarily present itself, but is rather the individual himself. Individuals learn to use that mental concept of being a thinking being through being equated through one's own mind, but thinking more objectively about mental abstracts from that fact. Nagel thinks that a thinker is someone who's subjective and has the perspective of the world, and he abstracts away from this perspective that someone, he means one is to leave out, which is he or she sought to explain. In his book, Mind and Cosmos, Nagel explains how there is a proper understanding of a place in which nature holds mental properties that involve a revolution in human understanding in the physical and mental worlds. When we view his philosophy, we see that there's a notion of a relationship between the mind and the body. And in his book, he talks about the idea of the physical mental holds, what constitutes reality, what constitutes people, places, mental properties that involve, he says, a revolution in human understanding in the physical and the mental, which start originally from a famous philosopher during the 17th century whose name is Rene Descartes. And he devised this idea, which is known as the mind-body, right? Also known as dualism, that simply equates, that covers what a lot of the philosophy of science covers, still focuses on aspects of, and that's the idea that your mind and your body are separate concepts. Your mind and your body form separate things that creates an issue, a problem where does the mind create the body or does the body create the mind? Are both separate or are both together? Rene Descartes, he originally believed that our minds were separated from our bodies, from the mental states that we have, a rational nature. His ideas later evolved further into Thomas Nagel's ideas, and a lot of his concepts, his philosophies, I'll be covering later in further podcasts. But for today's podcast, when we look at Thomas Nagel, when we see what he talks about, how do we describe the body and the mind, which one is believed are separate, right? What are the things that constitute our mind and our body, right? How do we see these things in our reality? How do we look at our mind and how do we look at our body? And how do we use those notions of, right, physical and mental to stand within our own realm of society? Well, when we look further into Nagel's book, The Mind and Cosmos, we look at the physical and we look at the mental states he talks about, and we see that when we look at our reasoning, when we look at our mind, there's a relationship that exists between the mind, the body, and the behavior in all living organisms that seems to be far more complex than just simply the three things that we are supposedly consist of, which is our mind, our body, and the behavior in all the organisms we have. But for Thomas Nagel, our mind, body, and behavior extend to the cosmos, to our history, to the universe, the things that exist beyond us, right? And philosophy is therefore seeking to reach such limits within our human consciousness in an effort to describe how reality itself functions and occurs. And in his book, Nagel describes how physics, biology, and chemistry, and all other natural sciences have limits within the human mind. He mentions about materialism, the idea that all things come from materials, that all existence is all physical and constrained and cannot answer the origin of life, human consciousness, reality, cognition, and value. With the philosophy of science as a subfield of philosophy, like many other subfields, it focuses on the foundations, methods, and implications of science. Questions that arise which constitute things or qualify them as science, right? What things are considered scientific theories? What is science? What is the ultimate purpose of science? And how do we use science in our daily lives, right? This philosophy, it overlaps with ontology, metaphysics, and epistemology. For example, when exploring the relationship between science and truth. In Nagel's book, Mind and Cosmos, materialism, he mentions, has limits within chemistry, physics, and biology. Rene Descartes, his particular experiment, right, this idea that's associated with the philosophy of science known as idealism. Idealism for Descartes was a view that mind is the ultimate reality, given in some way that there is a reducible physical world. The materialists will argue from these concepts that the mental and everything that exists within us is physical, but the other problem with that is, given that argument, there's another argument that's used against that, which is known as conceptual behaviorism, which is the idea of using your behavior and using the concepts that you can see, right? Conceptual things that exist within behavior, concepts that exist through behavior, that's offered as an analysis for the real nature of mental concepts. What constitutes mental things that exist within our mind? Another version that Nagel talks about is written by another author, Gilbert Ryle, and it's the concept of mind that's inspired by one particular famous philosopher, Ludwig Wittgenstein, a German philosopher who talks about mind and language. He talks about the idea that there is identified with anything physical or non-physical, names, mental states, and processes that are believed not to show expression. Rather, mental concepts are explained in terms of observable behavioral conditions of application, right? A behavioral criteria or assertability, something you can assert with the conditions rather than behavioral truth conditions. Essentially, our mental states in our mind that produce processes associated with states don't express for Nagel can be viewed as scientific principles of observation, and certain behavioral truth conditions can be shown. What people fail to realize, including many scientists, is that our human beings, right, our human beings itself, the way we think, we're conscious beings. We're given conscious states, and our consciousness can't be observed. With all the technology that we have, with all the research that's being done on the brain and the human condition, consciousness itself cannot be fully understood. Our mental lives are escapable components of our reality. We subjectively see things, and our minds work according to that. It's not describable by any physical sciences, right? And human beings are more than just physical brains, physical bodies within a brain that's confined. We're more than just neurons and neurochemical pathways that go through us and activate our limbs, our mind, our brain, etc. We're more than physical beings, but the physical sciences are used within the materialistic state, within many textbooks, within many college lectures, etc. Professors speak about this concept of we're all physical beings, we're conscious states, our reality. This is even mentioned within his book. He talks about evolutionary psychology, the best means of explaining the reality of the world around us without any form of idealism is the materialist state, where we have used evolutionary psychology and we use biology, chemistry, physics and the other sciences, the physical sciences, to describe what human beings are in essence. But if you look at our mind, if you look at the way we think and the way we process information, it's more than just simply physical. We do have a physical brain. We do think through the physical networks that are given to us, but our mind is able to conceptualize and think of these states of conditions that many times can be induced through various means. People rely so much today in our society on science and information, but people oftentimes, it's sad to say this, but many people fail to realize the inadequacies of science and the need for understanding things beyond simply the physical nature, a materialistic view of the world. We need to see things through a more, in a sense, spiritual lens, or a more open lens, more open-minded viewpoint. We need to see things just simply to view and to go above the minimum conceptions of grasp that we understand, concepts and ideas that fall outside the realm of the physical sciences, right? Ideas that we can contemplate mentally that exist beyond the physical world. They are not simply fantasy, real concepts that exist within the real mind. And what do you mean by real concepts that exist within the real mind? I'll give you an example, like energy states, right? We know that there's various forms of energy that exist. We know that there's various states that exist within this energy. Physicists speak about dark matter. We speak about many concepts and ideas. We oftentimes don't ever contemplate what exists beyond the physical world, or various dimensions that exist, right? Scientists have proved that there's over 11 to 12 dimensions. Some people even claim theoretically that there's a multi-dimensional universe that exists. But our science is not equipped to answer these problems. So for us, because it's a theory, it doesn't operate in that way. These ideas, right, they're spoken about in science, but when we look at things that exist in science, there's always things that are considered like pseudoscience that are never confirmed as valid research. They're not given physical nature. I'll give you an example. Like pseudoscience ideas or topics. We talk about ghosts. We talk about aliens. We talk about demons, right? People have these hallucinogenic dreams. There's all these ideas and concepts that are associated with things that exist beyond simply the physical world. A lot of these considered pseudo, or things that are not real, things that are not scientific. But a lot of science has proven that these things do exist, and they do exist in our reality, but we can't simply prove them. Not to say that science isn't valid or isn't true, but there are things that exist beyond the capabilities of humans currently with our technology that should be examined and looked at. Thomas Nagel, I think, is a really good example talking about it as a philosopher. And a lot of his ideas, he speaks a lot about materialism, but he also speaks a lot about idealism, but he talks about the notion of conception. And I think for the average person, what's important to take, and even for the college professor, is that our reality and our conscious state and our worldview is limited the way we see things. We're oftentimes are subjected to view the world and our reality in one particular way. You don't know me, I don't know you. I'm recording a video on YouTube, for example, and I'm uploading it, and you have no idea who I am other than through my words. But you have the subjective reality and experience of seeing my face, seeing my body, seeing my reactions, seeing how I think, seeing my processes, right, my mental concepts, seeing a variety of methods to which you can understand me as an individual. But there are other things about me and about you and about every single individual on this planet that are unique, that differ. What you should realize and what you should take into concept and consideration is that your worldview, your reality is unique. It's a subjective perspective. The way we look at the world and the way we see the world is unique in everyone's mind. But when we go in our daily society, when we live such materialistic lives, and I'm not talking about materialism, I'm talking about materialistic lives, clothes that we wear, right? Shampoo that we put on, things, the cars we drive in, the houses we live in, the things that we buy, these things influence the way we see our own reality and our own perspective. So we need to come out of these reality, come out of this subjective consciousness and see our reality outside, see other perspectives, read and learn. We are all subjective. We all see the world in different perspectives and realities, but we have to see that other ideas and preconcepts are unique in and of themselves. We have to be less narrow-minded and more open-minded to what exists in the reality and what exists in the cosmos and the universe. Thomas Nagel is a really good example because he questions a lot of what scientific principles speak of. A lot of science nowadays is considered almost like fact. Everything it talks about, if you look at science nowadays, people consider that fact simply because a scientist has said so. But many times, a lot of these theories are not put into question. They're not criticized. They're not looked at for what they are. They're not sought after and criticized uniquely by not just scientists, by philosophers, economists, etc. People who are familiar with these science and people who are not, to see a perspective that's deep in these issues. And I feel like today in this society, people live such fast-paced lives, such instantaneous, life full of instantaneous gratification in which they can never really sit down and see the world and see the reality for what it truly is. Whatever that may be, whatever we discover that to be, people have to learn to see that and view that with an open view. But the other thing is, when we look at the world around us, when we look at the science behind us, it's everywhere. Everything we do, everything that's influenced around us includes and involves science. And as a philosopher, I've learned to take into consideration the scientific principles and ideas and understandings. And I feel for a lot of people, that's important for us to see and to look at. We need to be in tune with the nature around us. We need to be in tune with our reality. We need to be in tune with the world and the way it operates. And for that purpose, we need to really educate ourselves. And it's important for us to educate ourselves in our own reality, the things that we do, and in our own sense of being, with our family members, with our friends, with everyone we interact with on a daily basis, so we can use our knowledge and we can use our expertise to better the world. Now, if you guys have any questions, any comments, any concerns, please comment down on my YouTube channel. I haven't received any comments yet. Any suggestions, any topics you want me to discuss. I'm going to be doing a few interviews in the future. If you have any questions, in particular concepts or ideas you want to talk about, if you want to join me and you want to speak to me directly, you can always comment on my YouTube channel. I respond to comments, or you can also email me. My email address is anthonypensa@gmail.com. It's ANTHONYPENCA@gmail. If you'd like to interview, you can find me again. I'll be uploading more podcasts in the future. Next podcast I plan on focusing on tends to be more towards another philosophical idea of the Christianity. We're going to be talking about. I'm going to be doing an interview. I don't want to spoil it, but basically, if you guys stay tuned and if you guys listen further on into my podcast, you'll see and you'll get to experience a lot more interviews. This is more of an interactive experience, so I'd like for you guys to comment and leave. Please leave, and that's stressing it enough. Please leave your comments below on YouTube for any advice or information you'd like to give to me, what topics you want me to cover, and what you want to speak to me about if you are interested in interviews. Again, please subscribe below if you haven't already subscribed below at The Level of Wisdom. I really appreciate all the people that are listening to my podcast. My name again is Anthony Pensa, and this is the Level of Wisdom podcast. I love you guys so much. Please have a good day. Goodbye.